Hi guys, welcome to part 1 of this tutorial for Massive, where we're going to be looking at how you can arm yourself with the knowledge and know-how to basically build almost any sound within Massive. So this first part in this tutorial, we're going to be checking out the graphical user interface, or the GUI of Massive, and how that pertains to what I call the 5 elements of sound design, which are tone or sample generation, signal manipulation, shaping, dynamics and expression, and finally effects. So those are how I kind of shape off and actually how I look at sound design in Massive, so I can really wrap my head around it, because if you just pull up this synth, even if you're an intermediate user, it still can look confusing as hell. You have basically just a boatload of circular knobs and all these little lines and tick marks and empty boxes. Then you have this whole kind of bottom middle section with all these tabs. And I think that the creators of Massive did something very, very well. It's an extremely deep synth, but it's not too deep. There are synths out there that are so deep and have so many options, sound design becomes actually more difficult, because one of the greatest tools for being creative is actually limitation. And like, take an instance, I love the synth. It's called Tone 2 Electra X. If you don't know what it is, check out Tone 2. They make some great synths, but Tone 2 Electra X is actually, it's super deep. It's basically 4 synths in one. And it's one of those synths where if you're like, okay, I want to make a simple pluck sound or bass sound, acid bass, it can actually be a pain to get there because there's so many options. Well, Massive is not the case. Once you understand the layout and how that applies to sound design, like I said, I'm not going to be covering elements of what knobs, every knob does this, or sliders do this and that. I'm going to be covering how you can look at it from a standpoint of when you want to dive in and start making sounds, this is what you can do to get you started. So Massive, I look at sections like this. This first section right here is the oscillator section. You have 3 oscillators, modulation oscillator, and a noise generator. And that's what I lump into the kind of tone or sample generation. So the first part of my 5-step process of kind of creating sounds. And next, you're going to get this signal manipulation. Now that's going to be filtering effects, insert effects, and anything that's going to manipulate the signal. This feedback amp would also be one of those options. Third is shaping. I look at shaping as the step when you're going to decide your envelope shapes. How many envelopes that are going to be controlling the sound? Are they going to be controlling, variable parts of the actual patch itself? Your LFOs, performers, steppers, things like that. Now that's going to shape the sound. It's mainly LFOs, because you could really easily argue that the performer and stepper would definitely fall into the 4th part in my process of sound design and Massive, which would be dynamics and expression. Now this is when you're going to be using, there's not one part of the synth that you do this in. That is basically just creating macros and modulation destinations. So that'd be like dragging this crosshair here, dragging your LFO, dragging these, creating macros, custom macro controls. That's where that falls into. Now, that can happen at any point, almost at any destination or any section of the synth. And then last is going to be your effects. I purposely save effects for last because a lot of sound designers will, and producers, musicians alike, they will create sounds that don't sound good until they're drenched in reverb, delay, distortion, saturation, you name it. And that's not a good sound, because that sound's going to fall flat in a mix. It might sound super cool when you're playing it by itself, but with a bunch of other instruments, vocals, and in a song, it might fall flat. So I save that for last. So to recap, the 5 parts of sound design in Massive are tone or sample generation, signal manipulation, shaping, dynamics and expression, and finally, effects. So let's talk about how you can kind of use those I'm going to go into more depth about what each one of those are. So now we've kind of talked about the general layout of Massive. Let's talk about that first point, tone or sample generation. That is literally what it sounds like. You're going to be picking a wavetable to generate a tone. It's that simple. So right now I have a pluck pulled up from my Soundset Massive Beast 2. So I'm going to turn off some of the effects, and I'm going to work backwards. So actually, let me turn this on real quick. I will play something. I'm playing this live, so if I mess up, I apologize. right, so you get the idea. Very modern, current, contemporary sounding EDM pluck. Now I'm going to turn off the effects because that's the fifth part of the sound design process. So I'm going to turn that off. Now I'm going to turn off the dynamics and expression. So let me play this for you. So I turned off the effects. And that goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. That's still a really strong sound. It's clean. It has good frequency representation. There are no effects, no delay, reverb, or even EQ on it. So we just turned off part 5 of the process. Now I'm gonna go work backwards, and I'm gonna mute everything that would be creating kind of dynamics and expression. All right, so I just turned off the filter and these different little parameters that I macroed and modulated. I'm going to turn down the vibrato. And so really right now, all we have is that first step. It is kind of, let me turn these off as well. These pans here. So right now, I've just turned off the last 4 steps essentially. So now what we're left with is, I just worked backwards to the tone or sample generating step of the process. So if I play it right now, that is essentially the sound that was making the pluck. And that's why I wanted to work backwards, because I get a lot of questions from people asking, well, how do you know? Like, they're just confused how I know where to start. And it honestly just comes from being a nerd and doing this a lot and always playing with synths. But that goes to show you how important each part of this process is. If you take away even just 1 or 2 parts, the sound is going to be really different, and it's just not going to be as cool, as thick, as usable in a mix. Because right now, this is awful. It sounds like a crappy harpsichord. So that being said, right now, we're just at the tone generating process, right? I have 1 oscillator. The reason why there's only 1 oscillator is a lot of sounds only need 1 or 2 oscillators. In the digital age, I think we've been really blessed with, and actually spoiled with, the idea of having like 6, 5, 4, 8 oscillators, 3 synths embedded in one. You don't need it. You really only need 2 or 3, and then maybe a noise or a sub-generator. But a lot of plucks and a lot of those really clean sounds that sound larger than life, they're just 1 oscillator. So I chose this drive waveform for it. And you might be wondering right now, well, why the hell would why would I choose that waveform for a pluck? Because let's say I was starting out trying to make a pluck. I like the attack of the sound. That's the reason. I don't like the decay of it at all, but I'm getting all that out of there in a pluck because a pluck doesn't have a lot of decay. I just think that sound is a cool sound. So I can change the waveform and see. So it's a really dark attack. So I don't think it'd make a very good pluck. This one would. It's got a nice bright, kind of almost snappy attack to it. So let's roll with that. And we'll go through some of these processes now in actually the right order. So part 1, step 1, tone or sample generation. First, you're going to go to this oscillator section and choose your waveform. I've done that. I'm going to roll with that. And it's easier, I think, to add oscillators once you get going, as opposed to starting with 3 and then trying to manipulate all 3 of them. Because if you start modulating and macroing, you're going to have to do it to all 3. You may not even need all 3. So that's why I'll typically start with just 1. All right, going down now, part of this sample or tone generation, the first step of this process, is this noise oscillator. So I am going to, let's turn this off. I'm going to add a little bit of white noise. All right, that sounds good. So I've gone through the first part of my first step, which is the oscillator section. So I'm trying to just generate a tone right now. Now the next step that I've lumped into the first part 1, the tone generation, is going to this voicing tab, because that's essentially going to set up your tone. Now, I'm creating a pluck, so I need it on polyphonic, because most plucks are played, you play chords. So you're going to keep it on polyphonic. So this oise and legato doesn't really matter. And then you have the choice of unisono. Now, if I'm going for just kind of a really cool, thick pluck, I might just do 1 or 2 voices, maybe 3. If you do more than that, it's going to sound more of like a lead and less like a pluck. So I'll typically keep it at 1. So you're making choices that will determine your tone, because if I turn this up to 2, it's going to change. Right? It gets a lot louder, a lot thicker. There's a lot more going on. So next, I can do this whole pan position thing. But you need 2 voices for that. So I just got super wide. Sometimes it's a fun, good option for plucks, so we'll roll with that right now. So I'm choosing things that's going to just, right now it's kind of the second part of the first step, adding to your tone. Next, I'm going to go to this oscillator tab. Now let's say hypothetically I chose this to be a bass or kind of like just a lead sound and I had monophonic on. Well, this is your chance to really actually think, okay, do I want glide or portamento? If you do, you're going to turn this up or down. This is a polyphonic sound, so it does not matter. And then you'd also choose, do you want to restart via gate? So let's play what we have right now and see if that's helpful. So my ear just made it a little bit louder. But I kind of like it, so we'll roll with it because I found that this restart via gate will help tame the phasing, the out of phase that can happen with this pan position. So sometimes I'll use that with these sounds. But all right, so now we've gone through. This is literally, we're done with step 1. We've generated a tone in Massive that sounds somewhat interesting, I guess. And now we're going to move on to the next part of this process. So let me change some of these decays so that's back to more of the default. All right, and you don't have to like your whole sound at this point. It's just really about having a strong foundation. We're literally building the bottom of a house, essentially. So step 2, signal manipulation. And you can start either on the inserts or the filter. For this sound, because it's a pluck, I'm going to turn on a filter, and I'm going to select low pass forward. Now this is where you can choose. Do you want a really digital sound? Do you want like a acid or comb sound, something that's more off the beaten path? For a pluck, I'm just going to go with low pass forward. So let me turn this up. So there's no difference between when you turn the cutoff all the way up and you have the filter off. But let me turn this down. See, now it's not a pluck yet, but it's kind of getting there. Okay, so there is a cutoff part. Now, what I'll typically do in Massive is, and this is a really good tidbit. I can't emphasize this enough, so this is something you definitely want to remember. Massive's modulation and macroing options are what makes it such a strong synth. Anytime you're in the first, second, and third process of creating a sound in Massive, so right now we're in the second step, we're manipulating the signal via the filter right now. Anytime, like I liked how this sounded right here, right there. What I'll almost always do is whatever I'm messing with, whether it's the wavetable position, the cutoff, a drive, a dry wet, anything like that, I'll dial it back more than where I liked it because I'm going to most likely, anything that I like, I'm going to take a mental note and be like, okay, I loved how the cutoff opened up. I need to modulate or macro that. It just makes your sound stronger. So I like the cutoff around right here for a pluck. And so I'm going to drag it back, and then you can see these are the macros that I had in from the initial sound that I just muted. Well, when I get to that part of the process, you'll see how that makes the sound sound so much better than just leaving this cutoff knob all the way up. So the sound will kind of be dead right now, but that's okay. Next, I'm going to go to, let's say I wanted an insert on here, so I'm going to turn on an insert effect, and let's choose hard clipper. Let's make this thing a little bit louder. All right. Sounds good to me. So now we've just finished step 2 of the 5-part process of how you kind of can attack creating sounds in Massive. And I just went through and I added a filter and I added an insert effect, and that is manipulating the signal of the tone that we generated in step 1. So let's move to step 3. That's going to be shaping. So envelopes, LFOs, things like that. Now by default, you should know this already. The 4th envelope is what is the default envelope in Massive. So this is a pluck. So I don't want to have a lot of sustain. I want it to kind of die out. So the default shape would look more like that when you open this up. All right, so what I typically do, plucks, you don't want a long attack at all. You want it to be snappy and crisp. But you don't want all this sustain either. You want it to kind of die out, and you want more of a release because you're typically playing passages like. All right, so I'll boost the release because I'm thinking, okay, I'm making a pluck. Let's do that. So that's now a good fourth envelope. Well, I'm not going to do an LFO for this sound specifically because it's a pluck. I could think about in the next step the dynamics and expression using an LFO to modulate a destination within the synth, but I'm not going to do that for this pluck right now. So that's literally all I'm going to do for this part because plucks are simple sounds. That's why I started with this example. And right now it's a good pluck envelope to have. Okay, so now the sound may not seem like it's coming together, but you'll see once we get to this next step, it really will. Next part 4 is going to be the dynamics and expression. So unfortunately, there's not just one part of the synth where we can do this in. It is literally everywhere. And dynamics can be, see this velocity knob here? Well, I can make this velocity sensitive, this envelope velocity sensitive. You can actually hear me banging on my keyboard right now to get the volume up. So sometimes for a pluck, I'll mess with that. So it's not as going to be as sensitive as like a piano or anything like that, but it'll have a little bit of give for when you push lighter or harder. All right. And now, as far as dynamics and expression goes, this is when you're going to add things that just make the synth more fun to play. I'm going to say that one more time. Part 4 of this process is the dynamics and expression, where you're going to add things inside a massive that just make it more fun to play. And I just did that a little bit with the velocity. Now I'm going to go back to my oscillator tab, because that is where the vibrato is housed. And what I'm going to do is I already have a vibrato macros, but let's just say I didn't, and I'm just making one. I'm going to add a little bit of vibrato. Makes it a little bit more fun to play. Okay, so now I'm going to think I need to open up that cutoff again. What can I do? And this needs to be a pluck. So let's get this to the part of the stage where it is a pluck again. Because if I turn this cutoff up, it's sounding pluckish, right? Well, to really bring this thing home, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my first envelope. And I'm going to make 2 custom envelopes. So the first one is the first envelope, which I'm going to use to modulate the filter. You don't want to do this with your 4th envelope because it's tied to your amp mod. You have more control if you select one of the other envelopes. That's why Massive gives you 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this in. I chose a shape that had a good release time, a really shortened decay, and actually a pretty small level compared to the 4th envelope. And I modulated this into my first filter. And you can see already why I pulled back the cutoff from where I liked it. I liked the cutoff right here before without any modulation. But if I pull it back and then bring this macro modulation out to about where I liked it, you can now see that it is a pluck. All right. Now, what I did again, I added a cutoff filter. So I dragged this up, named it cutoff. And then now I can control on this line without dragging this knob out. I can control the cutoff. So I can make it a little more open sounding to get a little bit bigger. Okay, so right now I can hear that I'm not liking that restart via gate, so let me try it again. And I'm going to go back to the voicing tab and turn this more towards mono. And this even might be a stage where you realize you don't want 2 voices, but I'll keep it on 2 voices. We'll roll with that. And going back to, we're in this whole dynamics and expression thing. These macro controls right here, these internal macros, the key tracking, velocity, aftertouch, and the release, these can be a huge help to making it sound way better. So I already had it dragged in for that initial pluck you heard. I had velocity dragged in to the cutoff. So now as I play it harder, not only will this envelope be opening up a little bit more because we move this velocity knob, now the cutoff will also be a little bit higher than where it's set at when I play with a louder velocity. Because right now, again, we're trying to make it more fun to play. So let me try it. All right, sounds pretty good. So I'm gonna drag this down. So it's starting to sound super plucky. All right, and then what you can do this pluck is you have all these different modulation options. So I'm still kind of thinking it's not a pluck yet. It's not there yet. So a great thing you can do to plucks is drag this envelope out, and you're gonna modulate the pitch of one of your oscillators or all of them. In this instance, I only have one, so kind of determines that it'll just be that first oscillator. And you're just gonna, because the default shape's gonna be something like this, right? It's almost always something similar to that. So what you're gonna do, turn the attack all the way down, the decay all the way down, the level all the way down, and then just bump the decay a little bit. Hear that snap, that little click it's adding at the beginning? If I do too much, it's gonna be a laser. I've done this a bunch in my tutorials on the ADSR network. All right, so now let's play this. Okay, so it's sounding even more like a pluck. I might boost that just a pinch. I'm gonna turn the amp, the noise down, and just play it one more time. All right, and now this might be a part where I'm kind of thinking, okay, I want to brighten things up. Might turn up the resonance on the low pass filter. That'll help make it a little brighter. Okay, so it's sounding pretty good. It's sounding pretty pluckish. And this is the part where you gotta just trust. You gotta trust your ears. You gotta trust yourself. It's like, I don't know if any of you record audio that watch these tutorials. There's a difference between when you're tracking like a drum, for instance. I don't know if you've ever wondered, how do you know what a good dry snare sounds like? How do you know what a good dry kick sounds like? Well, you just learn from doing it a lot, or maybe someone shows you what it should be sounding like. But there comes a point when this, you'll know, okay, I'm on to a pretty cool preset right now because it's not sounding like complete garbage with no effects on. And that's always helpful. And so what I'm going to do now is we're going to go to the fifth part of this 5-part process, and that's the effects. So I already had some delay and reverb turned on, so let me activate those. So I'm having a little bit of fun playing it. So I might double back now to that 4-step dynamics and expression because I think I can get it a little bit more expressive. So to do that, what I might do is I might bump this velocity out, go back to my 4th envelope, bump this, and actually bump this velocity as well. And now with this clip, I might play around with it with an envelope. So I'm going to drag this drive now, turn this down, and drag out that second envelope to control the drive so there's more, so it's a tighter kind of distortion sound. So let me play what we got now. All right, cool. So one last thing now, I'm going back to that 5th part with the effects. I'm going to turn on the EQ, and I'm going to want to kind of have a brighter sound. So I'm going to cut some of the low shelf and boost the high. And anytime you boost the high on a sound like a pluck or lead, you're going to want to turn down your filter a little because you're kind of opening up the frequency spectrum in the same way. All right, it sounds pretty cool to me. I'm going to turn down the vibrato a little. And I actually like it on one voice. I don't think I want the pan position. And so one way you can kind of battle that stereo image without using 2 voices of Unisano is to do this pan trick I do. And what you can do, and this applies for leads, pads, whatever. You take one envelope with its own shape and another. That's why it's good to have these 4 envelopes. And you put one left, one right. Well, now if I turn these off and play it, I'm going to play a chord so you can hear. Play A minor. Now these are on. Much wider. So let me play what we have. This is pretty much done. Let me play it. All right, sounds like a pretty good usable pluck to me. And I hope all that made sense in that what I did was I showed you how I kind of turned everything off backwards in this 5-part process, and then I went over it forwards so you can see what's literally going on in the sound design process. So you're not just hearing someone on a tutorial say, here's how you make this sound, do this, do that, do this. I'm showing you the why I do everything, not just the how. So that pretty much concludes this first part of the tutorial course where we covered the GUI, the graphical user interface, and how it applies to sound design, and just kind of really quick ran through the 5-part process of how you can really approach and attack sound design in Massive. And just to reiterate it one more time, they are, number 1, tone or sample generation. Those are your oscillators, create a tone. Part 2, signal manipulation, filtering, insert effects. Once you get kind of a good foundation with those first 2 steps, move on to the third, which is shaping. Are you making a bass? Are you making a pad? Are you making a lead? Make your envelope depending on what you're making. Part 4, dynamics and expression. This is usually you're going to be a 2-part process. Typically, you'll almost always double back, but do something, whether it's pitching something up, adding some macros, doing some modulation. Do something to make the sound more expressive so when you play it on a keyboard, you actually have some fun playing it. So try to find ways to make it more expressive. Finally, add some effects, distortion, saturation, reverb, EQ, and by that point, your sound should be really on point, and it should actually start to sound really good just inside the synth itself.